Welcome everyone to our safety meeting. So the content and everything we're talking about is designed primarily for people that work in an office environment, out of the field, not typical stuff that we would cover in a safety meeting for maintenance and construction activity. Okay, so let's talk about IIPP. First question, what does IIPP stand for? What is the acronym? Injury and Illness Prevention Program, exactly. That's perfect, that's exactly what it stands for. Of course, the IIPP is the written safety program required by Cal OSHA. It documents how we keep workers safe, how we keep a safe workplace, a healthy workplace, and the specific ways, the things that we do to accomplish that. True-false question. All employees fall under the IIPP. True. Absolutely. It is an all-encompassing program. All departments, managers, different levels of employees, everybody falls under these IIPP. Another true-false. Supervisors are ultimately responsible for the safety of employees working under their direction. Absolutely, it is true. The way the program's written, and this, in my experience, is the most effective way to have a workplace safety program, is supervisors have a very key role and responsibility. And that's because supervisors are in a position to make sure that employees working under their direction get training and information that they need. If they need equipment, personal protective equipment, hard hat, safety glasses, maybe a respirator, anything like that, it's the supervisor's responsibility to teach employees about their jobs, about the safety element of their jobs, and to equip them with what they need to safely perform their jobs. Now, it doesn't mean the supervisor is solely responsible for an individual's safety. Of course, it's a team effort. The supervisor equips them with information, training, and equipment, and so on. But the employee has to use them. And the employee is also going to be affected by actions of coworkers. If there's a team of guys working together, one guy doesn't follow the safety rules and could compromise the safety and cause injury to coworkers. So supervisors can only do so much. You can lead a horse to water, so to speak, but you got to rely on other people to do what they say they're going to do. If you give someone a hard hat because there's overhead hazards and they don't wear it and they smack their head on a beam and cut their head open, the supervisor told them about the danger, equipped them with the hard hat, the individual has to follow through as well. So safety really is a team effort in the workplace. All right, good question here about the overall elements of the IIPP. And all of the following are key elements of the IIPP, except one of these answers is not part of the IIPP. So B says disciplinary action against employees who report unsafe acts and conditions or unsafe conditions or accidents. So absolutely, that is the correct answer. Disciplinary action can play part of a program, and certainly we want to impose safety requirements, but reporting and communication is a key part of the safety program. We talked about you want to identify hazards before they hurt someone. Last thing we want to do is punish someone for bringing up an unsafe condition or an unsafe act or an issue. We want to encourage that. So we would never have part of our program be disciplining someone for bringing something to our attention. We want to encourage, we want the more people look for, identify, and report unsafe conditions, unsafe actions, then we're going to go a long way towards preventing injuries, preventing accidents, preventing illnesses. Another true-false question. Failure to comply with safety requirements can result in disciplinary action. True or false? Yeah, definitely that is true. While we don't want to discipline for reporting stuff, if somebody refuses to follow safety policies, then we do need to take action because that's going to not only jeopardize their own safety, potentially cause injury to them, which of course is bad for the individual and cost to the city, can affect coworkers and so on. The simple example I told you about the hard hat. You give a guy a hard hat, if he refuses to wear it in an area where there's hazards that he can bang his head, then that is subject to disciplinary action. So that is a part of the program to make sure we enforce the safety policies, the safety requirements that we have in place. True, false. Unsafe conditions and acts should be reported at the next safety meeting. Immediately. Absolutely. It's false. You want to report it timely so it can be fixed before someone gets hurt. Particularly for you all when the next safety meeting is going to be a year from now. You don't want to wait until then. You could bring it up. Let's say you reported it got fixed, but you bring it up during a safety meeting because it prompts discussion and alerts others to what happened. But immediately is the key. All right, few more questions on the IIPP. True, false, work tools and equipment should be inspected prior to each use. True, definitely. Anytime we're going to use, and that's not so much in an office environment as somebody who's going to be using a chainsaw or a table saw or some equipment like that. Personal fall protection, so on. True, false, accidents and injuries should be reported to a supervisor as soon as possible if an incident occurs. Definitely. Common sense, it's part of the program. The sooner we report, the quicker we can respond. Protect the individual's rights in terms of workers' compensation. Conduct an accident investigation, which we're going to talk about, and so on. And the last one, true, false, most accidents are unpreventable. Most accidents are in fact preventable. Once in a while, you'll have an incident or an accident occur that's totally due to environmental conditions and something outside of any individual's control. But invariably, when we conduct an accident investigation, we'll find little things that were done, actions taken, which contributed to the accident or caused the accident. Doesn't mean we're always going to have someone to blame or say, you were willfully negligent or anything like that. It might just be someone was distracted, or they forgot what they were supposed to do, maybe they hadn't been trained, whatever the case may be. But there's typically going to be reasons behind it. All right, so that takes us to accident investigation. All right, in terms of accident investigation, the reason that we conduct them is to find out exactly what happened, what led up to the accident, so we can prevent the same thing from happening again. The level of investigation, of course, is going to be based on how serious the accident is. If somebody is critically injured, breaks a bone, loses a limb, maybe fatality occurs, the investigation is going to be very thorough, very comprehensive. Interviews, photos, preserving the scene, all that kind of stuff. Someone reports they got a minor paper cut, got injured, the investigation is going to be much more quick, less thorough. Not that we're just going to ignore it. We still want the person to realize, hey, maybe you can handle something a little bit different and correct the way things are done. But the level of severity of the incident or the potential severity of the incident is going to dictate how comprehensive the investigation is. Like we talked about on the IIPP questions, time is of the essence. We want to report incidents as soon as possible. A couple other reasons why time is of the essence. In some cases, for severe injuries, they have to be reported to Cal OSHA. The last part of that question I just asked is, not only do people have the information fresh in their minds, the victim who got hurt, maybe witnesses, but you also want to kind of preserve the scene, so to speak. If there's, let's say somebody gets their arm cut off using some machinery. Well, when you conduct the investigation, you want that machinery to be in the exact condition it was when the accident occurred. Maybe there wasn't a guard in place. Maybe a switch was turned the wrong way. There's specific things that led up to the accident. You want to make sure you identify what those things are so someone else doesn't have the same thing happen. So if you do the investigation a long time later and the machinery's been used and manipulated and moved, you'll probably never get the true answer as to the exact sequence that led up to the injury occurring in the first place. Part of the investigation process and the response process, of course, is get medical attention. That's first and foremost. Before a supervisor conducts an accident investigation and someone's injured, get them to the hospital if it's an emergency, get them whatever medical follow-up you need. There's also paperwork that needs to be filled out, workers' comp forms, possibly injury report, in addition to the accident investigation forms. Okay, now in terms of conducting the investigation, and this goes with anyone involved, whether you're conducting it or you're just interviewed or a witness or whatever, you want to remain open-minded, as unbiased as possible. Remember that it's not a witch hunt. We're not looking to place blame on anyone. We're looking to identify what happened so we can improve safety for everyone going forward. So conduct it as quickly as possible. Look for any factors that contributed to the accident. Equipment factors, environmental conditions, what training records exist. Was the person, if someone was doing a specific activity and they got injured, particularly if it's serious, did they have any training? Were there procedures that they should have known about and should have followed? All of this goes into play so that later, after the investigation's complete, we can say, okay, let's get everybody together who does this similar type of work and has the potential to have the same accident and train them on what went wrong, what they can do differently, revisit what training might be needed, maybe equipment needs to be added, maybe they need to wear safety glasses because we didn't realize flying particles could, seriously injure someone's eye, and that's what happened. And so it's as simple as we want to train them and give them all safety glasses. So there's typically going to be action you can take at the end to prevent it from happening again and to make the workplace safer going forward, which is the whole purpose of conducting the investigation in the first place. Typically, for serious incidents that occur, we want to document what the findings of the investigation were and what actions are going to be taken short-term and long-term to prevent it from happening again. Again, if it's a paper cut, it's going to be a very simple form that gets completed quickly. If somebody has their arm cut off, it's going to be much more comprehensive. Okay, so a key element, as I mentioned, of the IIPP and safety program is inspections. Inspections can be formal, and in fact, formal inspections are required from time to time. I'll talk more about that in a minute under Cal OSHA, as well as the city's IIPP. But what I like to emphasize is individually, each and every person, every day you come to work, should maintain an awareness and look around your environment, your work environment, whether it be in the parking lot, on your way in, every work area you go into, just kind of maintain an awareness for conditions that could cause injury. A lot of times things are real obvious. There might be a cord draped across a walkway. Maybe there's somebody in drilling some holes in the wall, hanging some pictures, and they've got an electrical cord, an extension cord draped. And anyone who walks by, typically you could easily step over that, but somebody could trip, fall, and at minimum have an embarrassing moment, but potentially, a serious injury. So maintain your awareness, look for the obvious, and I'm going to go through a series of slides to remind you of some of the normal hazards that arise and can be found in a typical office type environment. The frequency depends on a variety of factors. In a typical office environment, you're not going to do a formal inspection very, very often because there aren't going to be a lot of new conditions. For the most part, it's a pretty consistent type of work environment as opposed to construction or maintenance activities where you're dealing with maybe heavy equipment, maybe you're digging trenches, demolishing building materials. Construction sites, maintenance type operations, inspections need to be conducted more frequently because of the changing conditions, but also the hazard potential is typically much greater when you're dealing with equipment, machinery, digging holes, trenching, a lot of different things. There might be chemicals that are being used, confined space issues, and so on, where the hazards are much higher. When it comes to safety inspections, as we talked about in one of the IIPP questions, actual work equipment, machinery, tools, safety equipment like a respirator, if somebody was wearing a fall protection harness, that needs to be inspected every time that you go to use it. For your typical work environment, you're not going to have that kind of scenario, but I just want to make sure that everybody here is aware of the need to actually inspect safety equipment as well as work equipment each and every time you go to use it to make sure it's going to work properly and it's not going to pose a safety concern. The formal inspections, when they're conducted, should be documented, and typically what's used is a simple checklist which kind of lists potential hazards to look for, and you walk through your typical environment, make some notes. If you see anything dangerous, you note what you saw. Hopefully if you're able to correct it right then and there, you make a note of that, and it's done. In most office settings, inspections are done every 6 months, sometimes once a year. Cal OSHA doesn't require how frequent. They don't say you have to do it every so often, except for specific machinery and equipment and such. They simply say you have to conduct periodic inspections. So in the IIPP, if you're a supervisor here and you're wondering, well, geez, how do we maintain true compliance? In the IIPP, we've written it generically so that we don't put ourselves in a position that if Cal OSHA was to come in and they said, hey, in your IIPP, it says you conduct an formal office inspection every 4 months. So where's your paperwork? Well, if you don't have it, now you're out of compliance because you're not even complying with your own program. So in the IIPP, we say that we will conduct periodic inspections based on hazard potential and so on, with it being kind of generic, so that's really at the discretion of the departments and supervisors as to how often you conduct formal inspections. Gives us some leeway that if no one does a formal inspection for a year or even 2 years, then we can revisit it as appropriate. At a minimum, though, individually, you can keep your eyes and ears open day in and day out, and collectively, that's a pretty powerful safety inspection that's done on a constant basis, and that's how we really prevent unsafe conditions and stuff from causing injury. Okay, I'm going to talk about what you look for when you go through a typical inspection. And if I was conducting a formal inspection, specific things I would look for in like an office setting. Postings, there should be emergency telephone numbers, Cal OSHA posters and such posted at a location where most employees are going to pass through or see on a regular basis. Of course, you always want to have top-heavy bookcases, bookshelves, stuff like that secured to the wall. You want to store heavy stuff lower if possible. So if you've got shelving and you can put the heavy stuff on the lower shelves, it's safer in terms of toppling over, and it's also safer in terms of back safety, going and grabbing it as opposed to trying to reach and get something heavy up top. Housekeeping is a big issue when it comes to office safety, keeping the work area free of clutter and free of stuff that people can trip over, fall over, and so on. And I'm not talking, of course, about your desk having clutter. If you've got a bunch of files and it looks disheveled, that might cause you to be stressed out or realize how much work you have ahead of you. But in terms of physical safety, we're talking about storing boxes in the aisles or walkways, how cords are draped across, computer cables, telephone wiring, all that type of stuff. Another general item to look for in an office safety inspection is first aid kits. Know where they are, and in a formal inspection, we actually want to look and make sure that they're replenished and that they have all the contents that they're supposed to have. Typically, there'll be a list inside the kit, and you can verify whether everything's there. So we always look at that during a formal inspection. Any exit areas, you want to be sure that they're free and accessible, they're not blocked, and if there's exit signage, we have one like right here, the couple of doors in this room, we have clear exit signage. We want to make sure that that's bright, clear, and everything's good there. Aisles and walkways are a key area to make sure that there's no trip hazard. If you got changes of flooring, maybe from a tile floor to carpeting, that the carpet's not pulling up, that could trip somebody, that there aren't cords, boxes, nothing stored that's going to impede progress in heavy traffic areas. You also want to make sure that when you're on stairs and places like that and you're doing an inspection, is that if you have tread or any kind of slip resistant, that it's in good condition. Sometimes, particularly in outdoor areas, that will deteriorate over time. And while it's designed to be a safety item to prevent slips on stairs, it actually, if it deteriorates and becomes damaged, then it can become a trip hazard. In general, walking on stairways is a real danger. During the last meeting, I told a story that just happened on Super Bowl Sunday in my neighborhood. We had a bunch of people over, and then people were hanging out before the game started just this past weekend. And one of the neighbors, it was a lady who I know pretty well, she was moving real slow, and she has a 2-year-old son, and she told her husband, I can't pick him up. I'm like, what happened? And she said that morning, the morning of Super Bowl Sunday, in her house, they have a 2-story home, and it's stairs, and the stairs are carpeted, and her foot just slipped on the carpet as she was coming down the stairs, and she fell 6 steps and jacked herself up. She didn't have anything broken or anything obvious. She hadn't gone to the doctor, but her back was hurting, and she couldn't pick up her son. She was just miserable. And just from, going down the stairs in her own house. And I'm sure if you have stairs, whether it's at home or at work, that everyone's had at least a near miss where you kind of slip on stairs. And it happens all too often. It's a pretty common way that people get hurt. So that's something to always pay attention to individually, but also when we conduct an inspection, make sure that handrails are in good condition on any stairs in your workplace, and again, that there's no floor surfaces that could cause you to easily slip or trip. In terms of looking around a typical office environment, for things that are stored and housekeeping and such, make sure that there aren't things with sharp projections or things placed around a corner where someone could blindly turn the corner and run into something and bump into it or trip over it. And of course, when it comes, we mentioned already, to cables, cords, stuff like that, all potential trip hazards, and they should be secured properly and out of the walkways. Lighting also plays a role. If you have an area that has overhead lighting and it's dark and all of a sudden you got it's going to be harder to see and potentially trip and fall and so on, we want to report that and get it fixed. Electrical hazards are always going to be a potential danger in an office environment, electrical and fire hazards. So when we're looking around, we want to make sure that cover plates are on outlets. We don't have any exposed wiring. We don't have outlets that are overloaded with a bunch of plugs and the double and triple prongs coming out with all kinds of overloading where it presents potential electrical hazard. We want to make sure that if extension cords are used, that they're only used on a temporary basis. If an extension cord, the way that the safety regulations read, is if an extension cord is being used on a long-term basis, then that's actually illegal, and we need to then have maintenance install wiring such that we can have hard electricity as opposed to an extension cord. It's fine to use temporarily, but not long-term. Of course, all of your 3-plug cords should have the 2 prongs and the ground fault prong as well, so make sure all the prongs are in good condition on cords and stuff. If you have any electrical panels or electrical equipment, you're supposed to have enough space around them so there's nothing coming into contact with it where it can be an electrical or fire hazard. And 36 inches is the guideline around electrical panels. You want to have space. When we conduct a formal inspection, that's something that would be on any checklist that you'd look for. If you have any combustible or flammable items, they should be labeled. In a typical office environment, you're not going to have a lot of that. But if we did, we want them to be in a cabinet in a cool place away from an area where they can become an issue. Other combustible materials, even like paper and stuff and waste baskets, you want to keep away from heat sources. So heat lamps, strong lighting that's close by, anything that could cause a fire. Along the lines of fire, we want to have our fire extinguishers in good condition and accessible. So when we're conducting an inspection, we want to make sure that they're free of obstruction, that you can get to them, that they look good, the pin is in place, the hose is secure and adequate, it's been charged. You can look at the pressure gauge and see if it has pressure in it. You can look at the inspection schedule to see if it's regularly being inspected, all of those types of things. And in your own facility, this kind of goes along with the emergency action plan, is be sure that you know that you're familiar with where your fire extinguishers are at each of the work sites that you work at. Some buildings have sprinkler heads for fire system, and so when we conduct inspection, we want to make sure that we don't have boxes or anything stored up high that could obstruct those or come into contact or damage them, which could cause a problem with the system. And the last part of office safety I'm going to talk about in terms of just paying attention and conducting safety inspections is if you have any stored chemicals, they should be labeled. They should be labeled with the identity of what they are and typical danger warnings, like maybe it's flammable or toxic by inhalation or whatever. And a key common thing that we find when we conduct inspections in office environments and other work settings is water spray bottles that'll have water in them, and they'll just be sitting there with no labeling at all. And that's a big no-no, because even if a water spray bottle has water in it, you want to indicate that so it's clear it's just water, so everyone knows that. And it doesn't have to be a formal special label or anything. You can even put masking tape or duct tape on the bottle, or you could just use a Sharpie and write right on the bottle, water. And just, of course, if you ever do that, make sure you don't put anything else in that bottle besides water. Last thing you want is a bleach water mixture or ammonia or something to be sprayed thinking it's just water. When you evacuate, it's key that, number one, you remain calm and that you minimize talking, particularly if it's, a true emergency. We're not talking about just a drill. If you know a drill's occurring, it's always going to be a little bit different. But if it's a true emergency, you want to minimize talking and follow and listen for instructions. Get to your evacuation assembly point as quickly as you can. Typically, the fire department will have responded or is responding. And to the extent you can, assist people who need help. If we have, someone who's physically impaired, maybe a visitor to the building who doesn't know their way around, do anything you can to help others as you're evacuating as well. To some extent, if it's a serious emergency where injuries have occurred, you may be able to provide first aid and CPR, particularly if you've been trained. If you've got formal training on that and you're willing to do so, that's fantastic. The more people we have doing that in the event of a major emergency with multiple injuries, the fire department's going to do what they can, but to the extent we can supplement that, that's great. Fire extinguishers, we talked about knowing where they are. So if small fires are an issue and you can get to and use that fire extinguisher, again, you're not replacing the fire department, but you can help out quite a bit. And of course, in terms of communication, anyone and everyone who can quickly call 911 and at least get that process started, that's very important as well. Ideally, everybody should be prepared to some extent, and the emergency action plan kind of lists some specific actions. One key, of course, is to have some supplies, food, water, things that can hold you and your family over for a few days if we have a major earthquake or something that makes getting to a store, getting to potable water difficult for any period of time. And you also want to have some supplies like emergency lighting, flashlights, batteries, light sticks, a radio, a battery operated, anything to assist in the event you go without power for any significant duration. So it's always good to have on hand. It's also good to know that you and other family members who are old enough and can physically do so can turn off utilities, gas, water, electricity. And a lot of people don't know, even in their own homes, how do I turn off the gas? How do I turn off where's the main water? So that's something that you should proactively identify, so that if we have a big earthquake and you have a gas smell and you need to turn off your gas, you're going to know how to do so, or you're going to know where the main panel is to turn off your electricity if you've got electrical hazards going on. So it's critical you identify that ahead of time. It's also important to identify your own meeting place, your own evacuation assembly area, so to speak, particularly for family members. If an emergency happens while the kids are at school and you're at work, where are you guys going to convene, when it's safe to do so? Particularly if cell towers are down and communication becomes an issue, it's nice for everybody to know where you're going to go, even if you don't talk. Maybe the lines are busy and overloaded. So planning ahead like that is good. It's also good to contact a person out of the state, just in case we've lost all local communication. Everybody calls, Aunt Susie in Texas, and she's going to take notes on what everybody says. I'm okay, and here's where I'm going to be. And so if everybody calls that focal point, if you're unable to talk to each other for whatever reason, then you're all going to have consistent information and kind of, have that organized response as a family in place. Okay, the last part of the emergency action plan contains contact information, contact numbers. For fire, you're going to call 911. For a medical emergency, if it's life-threatening and imminent, you need a quick response, you're still going to call 911.